Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on relatively short notice. I want to make a quick introduction. Deputy Attorney General of the state of North Dakota, Claire Ness, is with us on my far left. You all know, obviously, the Chief. Chief Zabolski, thanks for allowing us to utilize your space here at the Fargo Police Department. I'm going to run through a quick synopsis of this matter for context of the discussion, and then I'm going to announce a decision that I've rendered in this matter dating back to July 8th of this summer. And I'll begin there with the synopsis. It was July 8th of the summer, 2022. At 8:09 a.m., regional dispatch received a call from the public, and in response to that, officers were directed to 3401 15th Avenue South here in Fargo. The call, again, I'm summarizing this. The call came in involving alleging that there were three individuals in a vehicle out there, a minivan, possibly deceased, in an apartment garage, number 305 at that address. They also were informed that there was a possible bullet hole in the windshield of the vehicle. Officer Adam O'Brien, a little over a 10-year veteran of the police department, he's also got 8 years of military police work with the North Dakota National Guard. He responded from the West Acre Station, and when he got to the scene, other officers, Officer Dirk Thiedemann and Police Officer Tyler Poole, the three of them located the vehicle in garage number 305. They observed immediately what appeared to them to be, and did in the fullness of time turn out to be, a bullet hole in that windshield. So they're getting the call of possibility of three deceased individuals in a minivan at this location. They got out there, they find three individuals who at first didn't appear to be any movement in the vehicle, but very quickly the officers did observe that there was movement in that vehicle after they observed the bullet hole in the front windshield. By the way, it's a 2008 Kia Sedona, and the vehicle was backed into that garage facing out at the time. The officers all observed movement in the vehicle, and they had no way that they could possibly know whether the occupants had been shot, whether there were firearms in the vehicle, whether there were other weapons in the vehicle. The officers drew their weapons and quickly demanded that the occupants not move and that they show their hands. We'll be showing you the videotape of this in a little bit, and that'll become apparent. That is a matter of record with the police officer statements. It is a matter of record from the other two occupants in this vehicle, acknowledge hearing the direct commands of the officer, repeated commands of the officers, and that the driver of the vehicle, Shane Netterville, was not complying with those officers' directives. They repeatedly, as I said, directed that the individuals in the vehicle show their hands. It was loud, it was clear, and it was enunciated multiple times. Cody Dunn was one of the other passengers in the vehicle with Shane Netterville. He confirmed that he heard those commands and that Netterville was not complying with the officers' demands. He kept moving his hands up and down out of view of the officers. Derek Stanley gave a similar account when he was questioned by police about Netterville's hands movement going up and down while he was sitting inside the vehicle. Both of the other occupants in the vehicle were imploring Netterville to comply with the demands of the officer, including that he not start the vehicle. But Netterville did not comply with the lawful orders of the officer. His hands kept going in and out of view. At some point, Shane Netterville started the ignition. His hands went down. He started the ignition in the automobile and was directed to turn the vehicle. Don't start the vehicle, he was instructed. At some point, his hands go down again out of view. Again out of view, and the vehicle was turned off. The situation continued, but escalated again when Netterville's hands went down again. He starts the vehicle a second time. There's a possibility that happened 3 times, but it happened at least 2 times. During this time, officers did not have a good view, could not gain a good view of the person seated in the back seat of this vehicle. So keep in mind again that they've responded to the scene of what is possibly a 3-person homicide. Now they know there's at least some movement in the vehicle. They see what they believe to be in, which was, in fact, a bullet hole. They didn't know if it was coming out of the vehicle or going in. And you've got people inside the van and one person in the back seat who they can't get very good eyes on and see all of his movements, and the driver of the vehicle is not complying with their lawful commands. At some point, Officer O'Brien, who had been the first on the scene and had first made contact, he moved across the front of the vehicle and was standing off to the passenger side. The situation continued, and his commands were continued to be ignored. At some point, Netterville, now the vehicle's running, Shane Netterville started to move the vehicle forward. He paused momentarily and then accelerated forcefully and rapidly in the direction of Police Officer O'Brien. Officer O'Brien was forced by that move to step back rapidly away from the vehicle in hopes of avoiding being run down by the vehicle that was being operated by Shane Netterville. This was confirmed by other officers on the scene. It was also confirmed by civilian eyewitnesses with no stake in this matter whatsoever, but to relay to officers later what they had seen. The first individual is a former military, initials EC. These are quotes from what he told the police of what he was able to observe out there in broad daylight that day. The van must have had some power because he shot out of that garage like a bullet leaving a gun. If that officer had not jumped out of the way, he would have been done. He would have been a done deal. A woman who works in the area, initials NK, was being questioned later by investigators about what she observed. She said, and I quote, "Yep, I know that he was about to kill him. He was about to kill him. He was coming to hit him." At one point, officers asked them again, "Is that what you think was going to go happen?" She said, "There's no thinking about it." She said she was clear from everything she observed that the driver was going after that officer. Additionally, to that taking place, I've told you about the first instance. Officer O'Brien on this side of the vehicle, as the vehicle is coming toward him. Officer Poole and Officer Thiedemann were on the other side, on the driver's side of the vehicle. In this flurry of activity, Officer Thiedemann had gone to open up the driver's side door and was going to pull Netterville out of the vehicle. That door was open then as Shane Netterville sped forward with the vehicle toward Officer O'Brien. The door came back and Poole had to extract himself from the situation or been hit by the door at the very same time. Officer O'Brien fired one round from his service weapon. He was carrying a .40 caliber Glock handgun that day. At the time that he discharged his weapon, he reasonably feared for his life. He reasonably feared for the lives of the other officers. The fear was twofold. Obviously, that they'd be struck by the vehicle, that they'd be killed by the vehicle, or seriously injured. The single .40 caliber round that was fired struck Shane Netterville on the right side of his chest, entered his body, and did not exit. The vehicle driven by Netterville continued up a short way, some couple hundred feet, up the driveway, down the way, crossed over 15th Avenue South, and crashed. Derek Stanley, Cody Dunn, his friends who were in the vehicle with him during this incident, fled on foot. They were later questioned by police and gave statements, some of which I've referenced already. Shane Netterville was still in the driver's seat when officers approached the crashed vehicle. Netterville was in obvious distress as Officer O'Brien began emergency medical care. He went instantly from trying to avoid this individual driving at him with his vehicle to providing medical care at the scene of the crash up the way. Once he made sure that he was not in any danger from Shane Netterville at that point, he removed Shane Netterville, placed him on the ground, and immediately applied pressure to the entry wound from the gunshot. He and Officer Tiedemann administered first aid while waiting for the emergency personnel to arrive, which they did. That was the FM ambulance. Netterville was transported to Stanford Medical Center. He was treated by medical professionals there, eventually expired from his injuries, time of death at 12:45 p.m. A short time ago, Deputy Attorney General Ness, Chief Zabalski, and I, over at the Fargo Police Department, the Assistant Chief Travis Stefanowicz was also there, a couple of other law enforcement personnel. We met with Officer Adam O'Brien to discuss the decision that I made in this matter. We met down in City Hall with relatives of Shane Netterville for a short while and shared with them the video, which we'll be sharing publicly during this conference and this afternoon. Let me talk to you about my decision in this matter. And forgive me if there's a little bit of repetition in here. Fargo Police Officer Adam O'Brien, he's been a police officer, as I said, for over 10 years. He has approximately 8 years of experience as a military policeman. He is an experienced peace officer. On the morning of July 8th, 2022, Officer O'Brien was at the scene just minutes after dispatch relayed a report of a possible multiple homicide. Officer O'Brien and his fellow officers, Officer Tiedemann and Poole, quickly located the minivan described in the call, saw what appeared to be the bullet hole, which heightened their concern. The vehicle was backed in, facing out. The officers had no way to know whether the apparent bullet hole was an entry or an exit hole. They had no way to initially know whether the occupants were alive or dead, whether they were armed, and whether they meant any harm to the police officers. It eventually became clear that the 3 occupants in the vehicle were alive, but the occupant in the back seat was not easily visible to law enforcement. In total, this situation presented a highly dangerous circumstance for officers and anyone in law enforcement. Shane Netterville was in the driver's seat of the vehicle, and he was not complying with the lawful commands of Fargo Police, including that he show his hands. Netterville repeatedly moved his hands up into view and then back down out of view. A fact corroborated by the other occupants in the vehicle, Shane Netterville's friends who were with him that day. Shane Netterville started the engine of the vehicle, then turned it off. He restarted the vehicle, despite the orders of the officer and the pleas of the occupants inside the vehicle with him, Cody Dunn and Derek Stanley. I want to pause and mention that there's no law in this country, no reasonable prosecutor would expect that law enforcement has to wait for the answer when someone is not complying and you're in a volatile situation like this and your information involves possible homicides and guns and bullet holes and everything else. When someone is not complying, their hands are going out of view, reaching down and coming up. They're not required under the law to wait and see what comes up from underneath that non-compliance, whether there's a firearm or other weapon or something else coming out of there. But repeatedly, in this instance, Fargo Police showed restraint. Time and again during this incident, as Shane Netterville was elevating and escalating the conduct, officers showed restraint again and again. It was Netterville's actions that elevated a tense situation into an increasingly dangerous, highly charged standoff with law enforcement. Netterville escalated matters even further when he, in essence, transformed his vehicle into a weapon. Netterville rapidly accelerated from the garage in the direction of officers in an abrupt and a threatening manner, forcing officers to make a split-second, life-preserving decisions for themselves, for the officers around them, and for the public. A thorough and comprehensive evaluation of the facts in this case and the circumstances in this incident established that Fargo Police conducted themselves professionally, bravely, and within the constructs of the law. I want to reiterate that our investigation establishes that Officer O'Brien and Officers Tiedemann and Poole gave multiple lawful orders that were necessary under the circumstances to ensure officer and public safety. Shane Netterville did not comply, and the danger to the officers was elevated. The officers instructed Netterville not to start the vehicle. He repeatedly ignored those instructions, just as he ignored the pleas of his friends in the vehicle to do the same. By starting that engine, Shane Netterville had, in essence, transformed the vehicle from a tool of obstruction to a weapon of potential destruction, presenting a clear and present danger to the officers and to the public. Still, Shane Netterville refused to relent, and moments later, he stepped on the vehicle's accelerator, he sped the vehicle menacingly in the direction of Officer Adam O'Brien, and Officer Adam O'Brien made a split-second decision to protect life and limb. That was a reasonable and appropriate decision under these circumstances. No officer wants to be put in that position, yet every officer knows that they could very well end up in such a spot each and every day. I commend the investigative work of the North Dakota BCI under the leadership of our director, Lonnie Gabrowska, who conducted a very thorough, very searching investigation of the entirety of this matter. I also commend the professionalism and the cooperation of the Fargo Police Department and its members under the leadership of Fargo's Chief of Police, Dave Zabolski. Chief, thank you. The Deputy Attorney General and I, along with the prosecutors, other prosecutors in the Attorney General's office, have fully considered all relevant facts and circumstances surrounding this incident. Our thorough investigative review has established the following: that Officer O'Brien's actions in this matter were justified. His actions were, in these circumstances, reasonable. And under the law of North Dakota, Police Officer Adam O'Brien's use of deadly force was lawful. At this point, we'll take your questions in a little bit. We're going to, at this point, show you some videos. I know the chief has some comments that he wants to share with you as well, and then we'll be glad to take your questions after the conclusion of those remarks.
Thank you, sir. Are we ready with video? Okay, so we're going to show you 4 video clips. This is the bulk, basically, of the video from this particular scene. These will be made available to you as well on our website after. I'll talk about that in a little bit. The first video you're going to see is the squad cam video from Officer O'Brien as he's approaching the garage in question, and he's going to park his vehicle a couple of garage doors down and exit, and start walking up to the scene. You'll see him signal at some point and draw his weapon. That's where you can see in the video the bullet hole in the windshield of the vehicle, and he's making some observations in the vehicle as the other officers are coming up behind him. So this video from the squad cam won't have audio with it per se. You'll see the incident as it unfolds in real time, and then we'll walk through the body-worn camera videos where you'll have audio. You can hear the commands that were given, and you will be able to see the actions of the occupants as that unfolds. Go ahead, please. Okay, so that's kind of looking down the alley. The next video is Officer O'Brien's body camera video. As he's approaching, you'll be able to hear more activity here and see a little more up close as to what happened. You can see the bullet hole in the windshield there at this juncture.
Yeah, clear traffic. Hey, let me see your hands! Put your hands up! Put your hands up! I'm not gonna tell you again, put your hands in the air! Put your hands in the air! All the way up! Do not turn the fucking car off! Open the door! Turn it off right now! Turn it off! Turn it off! Shots fired, shots fired. Send EMS. Let me see your hands. Put your hands up now. Put your hands up. Put your hands up. 323 vehicles. We got one male in the vehicle still. Let me see your hands.
So from there, they remove Mr. Netterville from the vehicle and give him immediate first aid, while EMS, as you heard, is already en route. We did not put the footage of them carrying him from the vehicle without out of respect for the family, but certainly that's on the video as well. The next video is Officer Poole's body-worn video, which is the third officer that comes up. He's the one that actually gets struck by the door as that van exits and goes in the trajectory towards Officer O'Brien.
Put your hands in the air! All the way up! Do not start the car! Open the door! Take the keys out! Turn it off right now! Turn it off! Turn it off! Jim, what's the suspect? Vehicle's going.
So after the van crashes, as you may recall, the two other occupants fled on foot. And then this last body-worn camera is Officer Tiedemann, who was immediately adjacent to the other edge of the garage.
Put your hands in the air! All the way up! Do not turn the fucking car! Open the door! Take the keys out! Turn it off right now! Turn it off! Turn it off!
That's the main components of the video from this particular incident. And I just have a couple comments to make as well. On July 8th, our community suffered the loss of a life as a result of lawful police intervention while attempting to detain and investigate suspicious circumstances reported to our department by a member of our community. This was a call that the officers received from a concerned community member who thought they had people who either were deceased with a bullet hole in a windshield of a vehicle parked in an abandoned garage in a very suspicious fashion. As you may recall, that vehicle was also found to be stolen. 28-year-old Shane Netterville was shot and subsequently died during this incident. As a department and city, we mourn this loss and offer our sincere condolences to the Netterville family. Likewise, as a department and city, we acknowledge the trauma inflicted on our officer who was placed in the untenable position of having to use deadly force to protect himself and the community we serve. While his actions were legally justified and necessary, he will carry the incident and trauma with him forever. This not only affects the officer involved, Officer O'Brien, but other department and law enforcement members who were at the scene, as well as the family and community. Everyone involved in this incident has been affected by this tragedy. I would like to personally thank our community for the support and trust they place with our department on a daily basis, but most importantly during this most tumultuous time. Additionally, I'm grateful for the support and thoughtful input provided by our elected and appointed officials. Following the decision today by Attorney General Drew Wrigley that you heard just before this, the department will complete our administrative review of the use of force utilizing the criminal investigative file compiled by the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation, as well as our internal review process. The vehicle Mr. Netterville was driving was reported stolen at the time of this incident. The other occupants are connected to other criminal conduct that will be referred to the Cass County State's Attorney Office. Those investigations are still active, and upon completion, our department will report out on those. Just to provide you an overview of the process and the timeline, as previously explained, subsequent to the officer-involved shooting on July 8th, the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation took over the investigation pursuant to department policy. The BCI responded expeditiously to the scene, spent significant time investigating this incident to ensure a thorough and complete investigation was conducted and that all evidence was tested and evaluated. We thank them for their efforts and commitment in this investigation. On July 11th, I provided an update to our City Commission, and on July 14th, at the Police Advisory and Oversight Board meeting, I provided an update and informed our community stakeholders of the investigative process verbally and via PowerPoint, as well as addressed policy and general questions from the board. My personal thanks to those individuals for their partnership, objectivity, and restraint. I am well aware that their willingness to understand the process, along with their responsible messaging, is a key piece in alleviating initial community concern. On August 8th, 30 days after the incident, the Attorney General received the bulk of the investigative files from BCI and began his review. And today, August 29th, 51 days after the incident, he issued his decision, finding that Officer O'Brien's use of force was lawful and reasonable, and that he acted in self-defense within statutory authorities as a law enforcement officer. Reviews of this nature place a great burden on our prosecutors as well. We appreciated his thorough and thoughtful review of this matter. I want to thank him for all of the attention he gave this. Subsequent to that decision, I would anticipate Officer O'Brien will be placed back on full duty on or about September 7th of this year. The department will now complete an administrative review of the incident, looking again for training or substantive policy issues related to the use of force and address them accordingly. This review will be presented to our Advisory and Oversight Board at its regularly scheduled meeting on September 8th at 5 p.m. That's next Thursday at 5 p.m. at City Hall. Further, in order to meet our commitment of transparency and better educate our public about this incident, the department will provide an in-depth analysis of the incident utilizing the context of the officer's observations and statements in concert with the same video clips that were just presented to you today, as video alone does not always show the many perspectives and proximity that are involved in a deadly force decision. Certainly this is a dynamic situation, and a video on its own does not tell you everything that the officer perceived, saw, felt, what was behind them, what they could and could not do. And that's the benefit of that context. So we'll go over that in greater detail at the advisory board meeting. Officer-involved shootings, while they rightly receive enhanced scrutiny and community concern, are not commonplace, especially here in Fargo. While our department and our region did have a busy July in terms of these events, it's important to note that our officers successfully resolve conflicts with little or no force required on a daily basis, oftentimes placing themselves in jeopardy while doing so, such as last weekend's incident at the Northside Hotel where multiple shots were fired, and we were able to successfully put that person in custody without deadly force. In 2021, our department responded to nearly 54,000 calls for service. Use of force was needed to effectuate arrest 61 times. That's 0.11%. That's less than half a percentage point of all of those calls. And the vast majority of those, 50 of them, involve mere physical restraint versus the use of other weapons. Additional use of force data is available for public consumption on our department website, and a presentation on this was also given to our advisory and oversight board a couple weeks ago. Our officers are committed to the values of our organization, most especially respect for the public and sanctity of life. They do tremendous work and put great effort towards de-escalating violent encounters, many of which could otherwise result in deadly force situations, but due to their professionalism and restraint are resolved without loss of life or injury. As the Attorney General said, we did see a lot of restraint in this particular situation until all those options were eliminated. You don't hear about those situations every day, the almost or could have incidents that these officers successfully resolve, but they happen on a routine basis. Our officers recognize how important it is to sustain community support, as well as the adage that the safety of the officers and the safety of the community are inextricably connected. We keep each other safe, and we're equally responsible for public safety here in Fargo. As our internal review completes, we ask for that same level of support and understanding. The video clips shown today will be made available on our website. They are clips of the long portions of the video. In the coming weeks, our staff will work through the voluminous BCI report to redact that once our internal review is done, and from that point make it available to the public at no cost, so that if somebody wants to read the investigation with redactions in it, we'll make that available. And as part of our continued effort to educate and inform the public, I again encourage community members to attend our next advisory and oversight board so that we can prevent future tragedies from occurring. These things, there was an opportunity here for Mr. Netterville to submit to arrest and put a safe resolution on this. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and again, our sincere condolences to the family, but our officers also have to protect themselves as well. In closing, please keep the Netterville family and our department members in your thoughts and prayers. We'll keep our community updated as we progress. And I think we'd be willing to take any questions. Thank you.
I guess this is for the chief, actually. Is Officer Ryan, does he feel like he's ready to go back, given all the trauma he's been through?
Yeah, we have a pretty robust psychological, not fitness for duty, but service in place, and yeah, Officer O'Brien appears to be ready to go back.
Other than Mr. Netterville complying with the officers, could this have ended any other way?
I mean, when you say other than complying, I mean, I'm not sure what else drove these circumstances, the escalating non-compliance as it went along. Had he complied, I think it's very obvious when you look at the restraint shown by these officers. The law doesn't require those officers to wait and see what he comes up with. And he came up several times with his hands away from, out of view and into view. The law doesn't require that they wait through that, but they did. I would say at some risk to themselves, they did. Had he complied, it's very obvious to me, sizing up the whole circumstances, this would have ended peacefully. He and the others, the officers would have continued on with their investigation of the circumstances. The individuals would have been taken out of the vehicle, the contents inventoried. Everybody would have gone home safe. I think that's That's the crystal clear takeaway from this. Compliance with those officers at any one of those steps would have immediately de-escalated the circumstances, but instead, there was the opposite. Shane Netterville continued to escalate beyond. I said at one point, when the car went from just obstructing officers' views to now being turned on, now it's prepared to be dangerous. And then he exercised the act that made that vehicle, in fact, into a deadly weapon, made it the most dangerous it could possibly be, careening out of the garage and in the direction of officers.
I guess maybe as a follow-up to that, do you think officers did everything they could to de-escalate the situation, or was there something else that they could do?
I can't think of a thing, with everything known to the officers when they came up upon that scene and what they encountered, the complete non-compliance from the minute they got there, I can't even imagine what they could have done differently without just saying, just walk away from the scene of what they don't even know. Has there been a homicide? Have these people been shot? Did they shoot somebody? What's going on? And now they've got the one person refusing to stop reaching down below the seat or the dash and around the area of the steering column and back up. Not sure what they... Yeah, Matt.
You've been doing this long enough. You know there's going to be people who say, why not let the car just drive away? What's your response to that?
Why have police officers at all? They responded to the scene of what had been called in as a potential 3 homicide victims in a vehicle with a gunshot in the front windshield. Law enforcement could walk away from everything. They could walk away from cars speeding through their community. They could walk away from drug dealers. They could walk away from rapists. They could walk away from homicides. They could walk away from arsonists. This is no different. This is a very serious law enforcement contact with the public in a matter of heightened scrutiny, because you're being called in as a homicide and you find 3 individuals sitting in a car exactly where you're told they were going to be, with what appears to be, and which in fact was, a bullet hole in the windshield. And now they're rooting around in there. You can't even see the one in the back seat very well. So what you're describing is, could the officers have walked away from it? Sure. And as far as they know, someone who's committed a homicide or someone else in the car has been shot or whatever, just like go off into the community. They are sworn to the opposite, to protect and to serve. They're sworn to do exactly the opposite, to engage on behalf of the public, to protect the safety and sanctity of our communities. I said it, the officers' actions were fully justified. They were reasonable under these circumstances. I would add to this, very professional, and they were lawful. I told the chief, and I told the mayor, not just saying this to be a nice guy. I'm sure that they are, and they should be, proud of the professionalism that was displayed. These 3 officers were working in concert with one another. It was professionally carried out in an attempt to make this come to a peaceful close. But the actions of Shane Netterville led to the opposite result. There was no other avenue short of just walking away from what they reasonably believed to be a potentially very troubling circumstance of gunfire or potential homicides. They knew what they'd been informed of, and everything they found when they got there complied with the reports that they had. And then they add to that someone in the driver's seat, escalating the conflict.
Do you know where that bullet hole came from?
The other 2 individuals in giving the reports, the other 2 individuals who were in the car with Mr. Netterville seemed to indicate that, they were aware of how it happened. There was a dispute with someone unrelated at another time that as I recall from the police reports, may or may not have involved a woman. None of which is known to the officers when they show up there. They just know there's a bullet hole in a vehicle, and you have 3 individuals in there that are moving around at some degree. I don't know if someone's been shot, if they're going to be shooting at the officers. They had no way to know those things. And then it gets escalated again, as I said, by Shane Netterville refusing to keep his hands in plain view. Pretty much conduct 101 that any of us would understand when encountering law enforcement, to not conduct yourself in a way that is going to be reasonably, as it was in this instance, reasonably taken as hostile and potentially highly dangerous for the officers.
Has there been any testimony testimony from the other two in the vehicle of why Mr. Netterville decided to drive the vehicle at officers?
Yeah, I don't know that you know, they would have the capacity to read his mind, but I'll tell you this, they stressed very much that they were imploring him to comply with the officers. The one seated in the back seat gave the statement about having his hands up, but it's almost like he knew, I mean, he knew it was escalating dramatically. He had his head down and his hands up the whole time. They were trying to get Shane to comply. They were trying to get him not to start the vehicle.
So Netterville didn't say anything according to the people in the vehicle about why he was driving or maybe the manner of decisions he was making?
Yeah, I don't have any information about, you know, what his thought process was or that he was communicating it to his friends in the car, but he was certainly showing something with his display of what was going on. Bailey?
With their toxicology, I mean, I know that police got called for 3 men slumped over. Were there any toxicology reports that indicate that these men were involved in some sort of drugs before this all went down?
I'm gonna refrain from that. As the chief said, there's some other matters pending. There's some other information pertaining to it, but yeah, the full toxicology reports are back and on Netterville, on Mr. Netterville, and I just shouldn't go beyond that. But there was some information in there that could have impact. Yes, sir.
How did the family react when you told the Netterville family about your decision not to press charges?
Well, I want to thank the chief for that opportunity also, setting that up to talk with them because, as the chief said, you know, we have empathy for them as well. They lost their loved one and in a difficult way. So their reaction was as would expect. This is difficult to see the video, and I went through and explained a bit what they were going to see to try to assist in them being prepared to the extent that anybody can be prepared to see that. Explained a bit of the officers, but understandably, that's a difficult moment. Yeah.
You said there was a meeting with the mayor, the chief, the Netterville family. Were you all, was this one big meeting or were these kind of separate meetings?
No, and also the Deputy Attorney General Ness was in there, and I think another officer, Travis, was in there with us. And we had just had one meeting with the family. And you know, that was extended as a courtesy, knowing that these videos are going to be out, and just to give them an opportunity to see them, and then share that with other family members, I guess, and those who know Mr. Netterville or people interested in the circumstances. And so that's why, I mean, it's not part of a required protocol or anything, but I think it was the right protocol to follow in this instance, and we met with them for that purpose. Following meeting with Officer O'Brien to let him know what my decision had been with regard to the incident, and he and I had not met before, but we had a good opportunity to have a brief conversation in the chief's office.
Was Officer O'Brien though part of the meeting with the Netterville family too?
He was not, no. No.
Is there any services that the state or the city is able to offer the Netterville family because of this?
Chief?
There's a victim witness program that's available through the state of North Dakota. That information was provided to the family shortly after the incident itself. And if I could also just clarify one question that Matt had about the walking away piece. You know, Officer Bryan wasn't really in a position to walk away. He was about to be run over, and he objectively, reasonably believed that. That's why he used deadly force. The other two officers did not fire, and after that shot and he was able to get out of the way, no other shots were fired at vehicles. Again, I think that demonstrates the restraint of the officers and their professionalism under a very stressful situation. They had every reason to believe that there were armed individuals in this vehicle, both from the information from the citizen, their observations of the windshield, and the lack of compliance and changing demeanor of the occupants, and certainly Mr. Netterville as the driver. So I think from a reasonable officer perspective, most certainly they should have been concerned, and I think they did everything they could to safely try and resolve that situation. But when we're in a position where we think the other person might be armed and they are not compliant, de-escalation options are very limited, and we have to make sure that we are safe as well.
Were any guns found in the car?
There were not, but remember that 2 people fled the vehicle before we got there, and no one is saying that any of them, we don't know that, they did not say that, but we don't know what was in the car before we got there between point A and point B.
Did any of the men in the vehicle have any active warrants the day of this incident?
Let's see, Cody was placed in custody. Mr. Stanley, I believe, did, yes. The third occupant that later came in to be interviewed by BCI.
But not Mr. Nedville?
I don't know, don't have that information.
I know that there are no guns found in the vehicle, but were officers considering the vehicle itself a weapon?
I think that when we go over this next week, that's exactly what you'll see in context with Officer O'Brien's statements, is that if you look in the video, you can see that that front right wheel of the van is turning directly towards him, and in a split second, he's got, he's worried he's going to get run over, and he has to make a deadly force decision. And so, we will step through this piece by piece. While it's seconds of video, there are many decision points and pieces of information that occur in that video that, with the context of the interviews and the observations not only of the officers but the citizens, it puts it in a much, I think, more obvious perspective in terms of what the legitimate concerns were and what was happening. Yes?
I noticed there was an arrest warrant out for Mr. Stanley. Now, BCI had custody. Can you say why he was released and what's being done to look for Mr. Stanley now?
I think that's a BCI question. I would preface it by saying that I think everyone would agree that allowing Mr. Stanley to be interviewed in this matter was much more important than his outstanding warrant, and I'm certain that BCI made arrangements to handle that, but you would have to ask them in specifics.
Yeah, we can get a more specific answer. Chief's right, that's a question I'll talk with the BCI when we're on the way back to Bismarck today. We can get an answer for you and call you on that.
Whose garage was that? Were they just parked in an open, random garage?
Is it which one?
Yeah, no one had a rent.
Yeah, we didn't, it wasn't a rented out unit, but the garage door was not in place, and they just backed into it.
Were they sleeping in there?
I don't know what they were doing leading up to it. Then there were some statements from some of the other occupants that they had been sleeping in there overnight, and then when officers got on the scene pretty rapidly, they started moving around in there. But that's just, I think, based on the statements of some of the others in the vehicle, and that's, I think, what the members of the public remember, someone called this in as possibly 3 people deceased. They probably didn't go over too close. They see a vehicle in there. Maybe they knew that nobody was renting this vehicle or this location, and then they see what they believe to be, which was a bullet hole in the windshield. They became alarmed. Those, you don't always have statements from the public, but the statements from the public in this instance, one military, one other individual, both eyewitnesses, both with no involvement in the matter, knowing any of the parties involved, assessed what they observed, and that's an important overlay in this as well.
So we talked about the stolen vehicle. Are we suggesting that Mr. Nedville or one of the other 2 men stole it, or could you maybe elaborate on details of how that vehicle was stolen?
We will cover that in detail at the advisory board meeting.
And then I guess one final question. There has been criticism that Officer O'Brien shot Mr. Nedville because of race. What would you say to those criticisms?
I would say this, there is zero evidence that this incident was driven by anything other than the circumstances encountered by those officers. The circumstances, as I described, and which are uncontroverted by the officers involved, by the videotape, by the eyewitnesses, the civilian eyewitnesses in this matter, is uncontroverted about the escalation of what was taking place at the scene that day. There is zero evidence anything along the line that you're suggesting. And I know that you're not suggesting that, but that you're suggesting some may. And I would just call on people to look at a circumstance like this and understand that our pledge, our oath, I've done this work across 3 decades of my life, is driven by facts, circumstances, physical evidence, other evidence in these circumstances, and nothing else. And not even a hint of anything that you're describing that some might have suggested, and nothing to support that whatsoever.
I just got one final question for you, Drew. Can you comment, I know you're doing the other officer-involved shooting, can you give us a timeline? Since, that's kind of been the story that all 3 of these happened closely.
Yeah, they were proximate, and that's making its way through the investigative phase with our BCI, and we stay, fully briefed on that as we go along. And just as soon as we get those matters in, as we did in this instance, the Deputy Attorney General and I give it full attention and prioritize it, because it's important that we get a resolution, not hastily. I mean, I don't think anybody would want us to make hasty decisions, and we haven't in this, and we won't in those. But they'll get once it makes its way to our desk, and we're able to evaluate all of the evidence in that circumstance. And you have our pledge too. I mean, we say it a lot in a lot of contexts in our office. The Deputy Attorney General and I have committed our administration to being accessible, to being transparent about what we're working on, and then standing up accountably and answering questions from people. And you have our pledge that we're going to do the same in that instance and other matters that are matters of public concern. At the end of the day, we should stand in a forum like this and answer your questions. We're always willing to do that. So you have our pledge that that'll be the approach when we get to that matter as well. I appreciate, like I said, the chief and the department providing this facility for this today. We've appreciated the communication on this. That's important about how you're going to carry these matters out. And if I may, the professionalism of the chief and his department in not, calling for, updates along the way, or calling to see if there, I guess I could probably imagine ways that a department might feel inclined to be curious and intrude. They've done nothing of the sort. I appreciate very much. I'm not surprised by it. I've known the chief a while, but we appreciate it very much. This community can feel very well served by this department, and can take pride in the approach. It's been very open and transparent. Our agents with the BCI had no difficulty accessing any and all information, individuals to be questioned, full cooperation in a transparent fashion. That's the key to getting to the other end of that, and people can feel comfortable that decisions have been reached in an objective way, and that the people involved, the leadership involved, will stand before you as the representatives of the community to ask the questions that will come to people's mind.
Along those lines, you were talking about tougher consequences for people using guns.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any update in that, or is your department drafting legislation?
Well, this isn't the day to talk about that, other than I'll point out that